I'm drinking a glass of Pinot Gris. It's a beautiful spring afternoon here in New York, and it's a Friday, and I'm a writer, which means I get to do this once in a while. I had a very unusual path to food writing. It's pretty unique, although one or two other people I think have done it. I was a restaurant publicist, and really wanted to be a writer, so just had that job to pay the rent. One of my clients was Alfred Portale of the Gotham Bar and Grill, and just kind of as a lark, Alfred asked me if I could help him write his first cookbook, just because we had a really good rapport, and I occasionally would help him write speeches or write letters and things like that, and I had always been able to sort of get him the way he wanted to sound on the page. The Gotham Bar and Grill book was a huge success. It was nominated for a Beard Award. It won an IACP Julia Child Award, which is the other big award. I thought to myself, this is never really the kind of writing I wanted to do when I was a kid, but I had a great time. I loved being around the industry, and I decided it might be a way to actually be a writer, and here I am 20-some projects later, pretty well entrenched. Brooklyn Fare, which has gotten a lot of attention, where I had a fantastic meal. I'm excited by restaurants like Atera, where Matthew Leitner is, where I just had a dinner the other night. You know, I really like Italian food, so I'm very interested in what Michael White's doing these days. I always have to preface this by saying that a lot of my favorite food is the food cooked by people I'm friends with and I work with. So today we're sitting at Perilla Restaurant here in New York City, and I love what Harold does. I also love what Harold Dieter, the chef, and also what he does at King Shop. I love what Paul Liebrandt does at Cortone. It's hard to say with New York. There's so much to pick from. I usually, when people ask me what my favorite restaurant is, I usually say to them, well, you have to give me an occasion. My favorite restaurant with my wife might be a different restaurant if I was going out with, 3 friends of mine. I started writing about food in the mid to late 90s. I started to be around the food world from the marketing side in the mid-90s. We were sort of past probably the real golden age when sort of what we think of as modern American restaurant food. When I got into it, it was all pretty well established. But not for that long. So a lot of people I knew early in my career were the pioneers of this movement. I mean, one of the first guy I ever wrote a book with, who was also a client of mine before I was his collaborator, was Alfred Portale, who was one of the major figures of the 80s. Through my work and just through socializing, I got to meet a lot of people, and I would hear stories over the years, and time moves quickly. People who are only maybe 10, 15 years younger than I am, I think, don't really know the history. It's not that long ago. I mean, the first famous American chefs, guys like Jonathan Waxman or Barry Wine here in New York, or Larry Forgione, all these people came up in the mid to late 70s. And I feel like that's ancient history for a lot of people, and I feel like, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, I just mean everyone's very focused on the future. These people really changed the way we eat. They created this world that we all eat in today. Not just the food, but the style of restaurants, the fact that if you want to have a good meal, you don't have to go to and again, there's nothing against French food, but it used to be that a serious meal meant you went to a restaurant that served French food and the menu wasn't French. Now you can go sit at a counter somewhere and have 3-star Michelin food, and that all started in the 70s and 80s. I just think telling that story is something that really needs to happen, and my initial thought was to do a book that went from sort of the early 70s to the present day, but all the best, as I started to interview people, all the best stories were in the 70s and 80s. It was a socially exciting time. It was a time when the book starts, these people who are doing something in California, it's almost unimaginable now, but they didn't even know, in a lot of cases, the people who were doing things in New York. And the ones in New York didn't know the people in Chicago. I mean, now everybody knows each other. There was a huge chunk of time where people were sort of operating in these smokestacks almost. Jonathan Waxman said to me in the first interview I did for this book, he said it was like we were all having our own acid flashback, the same acid flashback at the same time. Meaning, when he didn't mean anything literal about that, he just meant that, each of these chefs were having this transformative experience around food, but they were all doing it independently. They didn't know necessarily that there were all these other people out there who were kind of breaking similar ground for themselves. So when they all started to get together, it was a very powerful thing. So I'm really trying to capture that kind of ground zero moment in American cuisine when this all started to take shape. The main thing for me is to constantly keep things fresh, to try to work on different types of projects. The thing I always live in fear of is becoming, when you're collaborating, if you're lucky, if you've done enough work, you're constantly getting calls for projects, and for me, it's to work with people and food that excites me. So if you look at what I'm doing right now, I'm doing a book with Paul Liebrandt, who's a real one of a kind talent. Who's a Brit. I've never done a book with someone of British descent. Now that may not sound like that big a deal, but for a writer trying to capture someone's voice, that's interesting to me. I was very excited when I worked with Michelle Bernstein several years ago because I'd never ghosted for a woman before. So that's exciting to me. And then, I've worked with Italian chefs before, but the project Michael White and I are doing together right now, which is sort of 2 books in one. Half of the book is very traditional Italian food, and half of it's very modern, along the lines of what he does in his restaurants. And then, the book that Harold Dieterle and I hope to do is going to capture his food. It's called Harold Dieterle's Kitchen Notebook, and there's going to be recipes, and then we're going to take a component of each dish and break it out and give all kinds of other uses for that component, which is it's a bit of a new idea. I guess if I were going to say one thing, it's probably chefs who have a point of view. Who aren't just phoning it in, who aren't just doing work for hire, but who express themselves on the plate the way, if I'm writing my own material, I could be expressing myself on the page, or the way an artist expresses themselves on a canvas, whose food is personal. And they aren't just kind of trolling for trends and following, what they think people want to see, but are really kind of trying to, as they go through their lives and their careers, trying to kind of find out who they are on the plate. That's what's exciting to me.